Hello, and welcome back to Magnetic Masculinity Podcast, where we provide men with practical tools and strategies to bridge the gap between achievement and fulfillment so that they can live their most magnetic lives. Today, we're talking about a really important topic, in my eyes, about one's needs, boundaries, and values. And maybe before we go more into each of them, can you describe to listeners where do they fit in Magnetic Masculinity Blueprint?
So cultivating ever-evolving clarity on your authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values, not the wants, needs, boundaries, and values of your conditioned self or your self-concept or the ego, but of your actual soul desires and the needs, wants, and boundaries that every human being has. If we have clarity on those, it helps us navigate into that authentic alignment. And if we don't have clarity on what our, at least somewhat, on our wants, needs, boundaries, and values, how can we possibly, A, assess which area of our lives are filling our needs and are going to be fulfilling and which are not? But on top of that, how can we possibly expect to be in healthy, fun, dynamic, sexy, exciting, sustainable, healthy relationships if we ourselves don't know our wants, needs, boundaries, and values? How can we expect somebody else to meet those needs or respect those boundaries and values or align with? Again, the metaphor I always use would either be, it's like putting somebody else in a game where they don't know the rules, but they keep getting demerit points. They don't know how to score a goal, and they're constantly playing a guessing game or constantly failing. The other metaphor is it's like hiring a salesperson to do an accounting job when what you needed was a PR director. So cultivating clarity and really getting to know our authentic selves, not our conditioning or that self-concept we talked about in the first couple of episodes, but truly knowing what lights you up.
And with these, what happens or how can man's life can be affected if they are not in their authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values, if they're not living them or communicating them?
Well, if you're not getting your wants, needs, if you're not getting your wants and needs met, you're going to be unhappy. If you're not living according to what sort of you value, you're going to feel lonely, frustrated, misunderstood, unfulfilled, stressed. And then we're going to develop addictions. We're going to feel tired. And then boundaries, if we're constantly having boundaries, boundary violations, or we don't know what our boundaries are, we're going to overgive, or we're going to just, again, feel stuck, frustrated, disconnected in relationships, disempowered, tired, agitated, upset, triggered. So again, and then also remembering that we are multidimensional beings, like I often talk about. So refer back to previous episodes if you're not sure what I'm talking about, if you're just tuning in. But we are multidimensional beings. We could break that down in our vehicle of consciousness metaphor, or we could just look at we are mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional beings. So we also have wants, needs, boundaries, and values for the different layers of ourselves. So that's just a simple way that we can break things down into models so that we can more easily assess and understand what is actually this sort of somewhat complex way that we are in a human experience, and sort of using these practical mind models to allow ourselves to look at the different pieces of the overall puzzle of ourselves.
And going into needs, can you maybe explain a bit more what are the common needs versus individual needs, and what is the importance of them when it comes to magnetic masculinity, living in authentic alignment?
Well, needs, the thing about needs is needs must be met. And this is something that people argue with me a lot about, but we either meet a need directly, or we manipulate to get a need met. We can manipulate to get a need met through self-sacrifice, through arrogance, through addiction, through cheating, through lying, through I think we have a social responsibility to find healthy ways to get our needs met, so that, again, if we go back to our parts work episode, if one of our parts is not getting its needs met and we're not giving it a seat at the table of our consciousness and finding healthy ways to meet its needs and letting it hold that talking stick, it's going to do the hostile takeover of the talking stick and facilitate some of our more obnoxious behaviors. That's the same for boundaries as well. So if we're not aware of them, if we don't understand what that part of us wants and needs to feel safe and to feel fulfilled, and we don't get that need met, then again, we develop maladaptive ways to meet that need. Or in childhood, we develop strategies like manipulation, whining, crying, self-sacrificing, people-pleasing, avoiding, whatever it is that we're doing to try to balance, to keep this balance, but we're doing it sort of unskillfully from the subconscious. And that's what are the common, so there's needs that every human being has. So again, love and belonging is the number one biological, neurological, scientifically now proven need of the human species. So love and belonging is a need everybody has. But again, in order to fit in childhood, because we confuse fitting in currently with love and belonging, because we're in the emotional dark ages, we develop these self-concepts that we think will make us fit in. And then we try to go for the wants, needs, boundaries, and values of that self-concept. And in order to do so, we, again, separate from our authentic needs in order to fit in. So that love and belonging, which is the number one need of the human species, needs to begin with the love and belonging within the parts of ourselves we're ashamed of. A very good example of this would be somebody who's raised in a religion that teaches them that sex is dirty, or sex is wrong, or sex is sinful, or being selfish is sinful, and you shouldn't want anything for yourself, or you shouldn't be boastful, whatever it is that we're learning in our social conditioning, is then, if we have an authentic part of ourselves, which most humans do, that has sexual desire or sexual needs or wants, but we think that part of us is bad or wrong, we separate from that part, we don't meet its needs, and then people who are very in denial of their needs, we can think of maladaptive ways people find to meet that need, and they cannot feel love and belonging because they are ashamed of a part of themselves. So that part of themselves does not get love and belonging because it does not get a seat at the table of their consciousness. It does not get a chance to hold the talking stick. And as Carl Jung said, what we resist persists. So that part lives in the subconscious, or just sort of below the level of our awareness, because we have parts of ourselves we identify with and parts of ourselves we don't. Our blind spot, that becomes one of our blind spots, or shadows, sometimes people call it, and they will find ways to get that need met. And we also have other common needs like appreciation, acceptance, validation. A lot of people need validation, whether it be self-validation or other, compassion, connection, safety.
So
safety that everybody needs is safety.
I have a question about this, because you said that there are people who would argue to you about needs being needed to be met. What if somebody is like, I don't really need love and belonging. I don't really need admiration, adoration. It's not a need that I have. What would be your response to that? Because there might be some people listening who might have that thought when they're listening to this.
Well, it would be a discussion I'd be open to having, and I'm always open to being wrong and changing my mind. The perspective I would offer is that, again, it's looking at what is my self-concept. For instance, I used to believe that I did not need a relationship to be happy. And on some level of consciousness, or when I've meditated for months and been in bliss states where I need nothing and I feel like the connection with the whole universe, that might be true. But in our everyday third dimensional need of human species, we probably do need those things. We are an interdependent species. We are not a species who is birthed and then goes off independently on our own. We need our parents, we need family, we are dependent on each other in many ways. Even in a society or a corporation, an accountant can't do a job without a salesperson, without you can't have babies without two people. So I think it's fair to say that, we are an interdependent species. So we're either going to do it from a place of high entropy, struggle, conflict, chaos, separation, or we're going to do it from a place of love and belonging. And I think that the love and belonging, everybody could agree, is more helpful. Now, if you're listening to this and you notice that you have resistance, that's wonderful, because resistance is a really helpful tool for authentic alignment, right? So again, I used to be like, I don't need a man. I don't need anybody. I don't, and I would be like, I don't need to be admired. I don't need to be adored. I don't need any of that. I'm not selfish. I'm not greedy. I'm not this. But again, those are self-concepts, right? That's what my ego or my self-concept believed. My authentic self, who doesn't love to be adored? Who doesn't love to be admired? And people would say, well, then you're going to be a narcissist. And that could be a whole different episode. I don't judge narcissists either. It's not an optimal coping mechanism, obviously, and I've experienced the pain of experiencing that, but it's just a different coping mechanism to get a need met. It's just a different strategy to avoid shame. So it's a shame disorder. But I would say that adoration, admiration, and appreciation from an authentic place and meeting that need in a healthy way is actually the antidote to self-centeredness, narcissism, and grandiosity and being better than. So look at somebody who's like very grandiose and but not in a healthy, like owning their awesome way, but in a very like, I have to be better than everyone way. That's just a way to manipulate to get their need met. But if they were meeting that need in a healthy way, they wouldn't need that coping mechanism. But because we're taught that you shouldn't brag, you shouldn't, you shouldn't think you're better than anybody, whatever. I don't know. Some people are taught you should be better than everybody. You should be the best. And some people are taught more like be humble. So it depends whether you were taught to prioritize being the best or being humble is going to depend which your self-concept relates to. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. And can you maybe explain the difference between common needs versus individual or personal needs?
Sure. So personal needs is like kind of understanding yourself. Some people use tools like astrology or Myers-Briggs or human design or whichever. There's lots of different ways that people use to sort of understand themselves. So if you are somebody who is very, or we say extrovert, introvert, there's lots of different layers and ways that people use to try to understand themselves and others. So if you're somebody who gets their social battery charged by spending time alone and you really like reading and you really need to spend a lot of time in nature, which I think a lot of people should spend a lot of time in, or some time in nature. I think it's healthy for most people, but some people definitely have more of a preference for different things. So your own needs might be different. So for instance, your needs can have something to do with your authentic values. For instance, my husband and I both value freedom. So we need to be able to move about freely. We chose not to have children. Partially for that reason, that it would be having to choose to meet their needs or our needs, which again, that sometimes people get upset that I chose not to have children. And I would like to thank every single parent out there, because I think it's the hardest and most important job on the planet. And I appreciate every parent. And sometimes I say to people, and sometimes you have a minivan, sometimes you have a Porsche, but understanding who you are and what's going to fill your needs. A lot of people tell me once they have children, they're like, I wish I didn't have children. Or because maybe their authentic values and needs are for freedom, autonomy. Whereas another person, their needs and wants might be community, connection, nurturing, so different people We're all different flavors of the buffet. So again, it's really starting to understand ourselves so that we can figure out the right way for us to experience love and belonging, both within the parts of our authentic self, our authentic alignment, and with the jobs, the relationships, the friendships, the social activities that we choose to engage in. But again, if we're trying to only engage in things that fill the needs of our self-concept, our authentic parts are not going to feel fulfilled, and they're going to come up with strategies to help us try to meet those needs that we're not meeting, because they're not going to trust you as the CEO of all the parts of your consciousness. And they're going to do those hostile takeovers, or you're going to become food addicted, alcohol addicted, drug addicted, frustrated, tired, stressed, and you're just going to keep achieving, checking all the boxes, but still feeling frustrated, stuck, and like something is missing and you don't know what it is. And often what's missing is this authentic alignment, or what's missing is you're experiencing the pain of separation from your authentic parts that don't get to feel love and belonging because you, as the CEO, have not yet given them a seat at the table of your consciousness. And you have not assessed their wants, needs, boundaries, and values. So as multidimensional beings, again, we can look at ourselves mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, or we can look at ourselves as the vehicle of consciousness, and the different needs of the different parts that we will get into next week. But we can also start to think of ourselves as we evolve out of the emotional dark ages as not, I am Sandy the accountant, but we think of ourselves as like, any men who are listening to this, you might have a part of you that's like the sporty guy who likes to hang out with his friends, or you might have an inner philosopher, or you might have, a CEO who's like making, $200 million decisions all day, but then you might wear a different hat when you're hanging out with your kids. And you might sometimes just want to be held by your wife and told everything's going to be okay. And sometimes you want to let your inner child out. These are all different parts of your being, and they might have different wants, needs, boundaries, and values. So an example of that is that I have a part that needs travel and freedom and spontaneity and excitement and adventure. So I always let that part of me hold the talking stick when I was young. I never wanted to put down roots. I was like, I don't care. I was fly by the seat of my pants. But I had a part of me that also very much desired security, stability, a home base, some safety. So if I only ever let one part of me hold the talking stick, if I didn't get the other need met, I wouldn't feel in my authentic alignment. I would feel out of balance, or I would feel unsafe, or I would feel depression, or I would feel any number of things that are suboptimal because I wasn't actually meeting my needs. It would be like, you're the CEO and you've got one team member who's getting to do what they want all the time, but you have another team member sitting at the table who you're not assessing what they want and need of these parts of you, making sure that they all have a seat at the table of your consciousness, giving each one a chance to hold the talking stick. For instance, I have a CEO, Sandy, who's like, likes to get stuff done. I like to learn. I like to grow. But I also have an inner child, Sandy, and I need to get outside with her and let her play, not try to achieve anything, just enjoy and be present. I also have my inner goddess who loves to be adored and admired and cherished and hang out with my king and be loving and nurturing and soft. So these different parts of me are different needs. And I, as the CEO, can decide sort of which one can hold the talking stick in each scenario, and just making sure that I'm finding that balance of getting those needs met so that I don't start to develop strategies to get those needs met that are usually, again, if we're not giving that part of us a seat at the table of our consciousness, and we're not letting it hold the talking stick, and we're not meeting that want, need, boundary, or value, not only is it going to create separation, which is the opposite of love and belonging, but it means that it might do a hostile takeover from the subconscious. Not because it's bad, but because it's trying to fill that need for you, it just doesn't have very evolved skills because you have not mentored it into a way to meet that need in a healthy way. And it's not your fault when that happens, but it is your problem.
I have a question about this. As you were speaking, I was thinking there's like a lot of things to navigate when you're being the CEO of consciousness. Have you ever had, when you were working with men, have you ever had anybody who is like feeling under pressure of, there's so much pressure of like so many things to manage and so many things to kind of be in charge of myself, that they might be feeling like overwhelmed, or they kind of don't know how to deal with it or how to manage it?
Well, yes. And I think that for me, again, breaking things down into 2 or 3 models and getting clarity and familiarity on those models, for instance, the vehicle of consciousness, authentic alignment, allows you to much more quickly diagnose and repair when something is going wrong, because you have these logical mind models to help you navigate the sort of the mental, spiritual, and emotional aspects of humanity that men were not set up for success. Typically, I'm generalizing. We're not typically set up, well, most of humanity, but especially men were not set up for success to navigate. So it can feel overwhelming for them. And even if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I don't know which parts of me are authentic. I don't know which parts of me are coping mechanisms. I don't know what my blind spots are. That's okay. At least being curious about it is the first step. And at least creating that desire and being willing to own your awesome and being willing to own your shit and being willing to look at the ways that you've been showing up in your less evolved ways without shame collapsing or without beating yourself up, but just doing better and being curious. And again, there's lots of different ways that you can learn these skills. There's lots of different ways, or you can work with a coach like me that has a specialty in this area of helping you cultivate that clarity.
Yeah.
And it is a little bit, it can be a little bit overwhelming at first, and that's okay. It's like dating almost. It's like getting to know yourself, right? It's dating. But again, if you're going to date other people, but you don't even know yourself, or you don't, again, you're still like, hey, I'm a minivan, but really you're a Porsche, you're not going to feel very happy. And I think people should come to some of these clarities before they make major life decisions and before they get married and before they have kids and before they, not that, again, and not that it's like this is who you are and this is it forever now. We are always growing and evolving. But if you're tuned into your emotional navigation system and you're just curious and present and you learn how to master your mind and train your brain and become emotionally skillful, these things will happen naturally over time. It's just the initial phase. It's like learning to drive a car or learning to play golf or learning anything. It can be overwhelming at the beginning. You might suck at it at the beginning, but this is probably the most important skills you'll ever learn. So it's going to be uncomfortable. Do it anyways, because it's really important.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So going into values, which you mentioned before, can you maybe explain what values are and how they are different from needs?
Yeah, so there is definitely some overlap, but values, since most of the men I work with are professionals, either entrepreneurs or quite what we would call successful in their chosen career, I say, what are the values of the company you work for or the company you started? That's sort of like treating ourselves. This is all really like treating ourselves like a corporation, right? We're like, there's lots of different layers and parts. And if a lot of the men I work with are C-suite or owners, and they have to manage a lot of different things, that's the same as in managing ourselves. So it's knowing which part to put in the right role. It's understanding the mission, vision, values, the direction the company is going. But if you're a software company whose values are ingenuity, sustainability, and culture, but you're constantly making decisions that are against those, you're out of cohesion. And on the other side of that, if you don't know what your mission, vision, values are, it's a lot harder to make decisions. But when you have clarity on what that blueprint is, making decisions, to your point, is actually much easier, because you just look at them and you go, is this in alignment? Yes or no? And your body is going to feel more trusting. You're going to feel that love and belonging from within. And then your body is going to tell you. A lot of great leaders make decisions on their gut instinct, or make decisions on, on their inner knowing. But it's harder to have that inner knowing when we don't have a cohesive boardroom, or those parts of us don't have a seat at the table, or they're constantly trying to find maladaptive ways to meet their needs met, and we're living completely out of alignment with our mission, vision, values, or our wants, needs, boundaries, and values. So again, it's like a company or a corporation or a brand. You want to have some understanding and some insight, and then over time, it's really actually makes everything else in your life much easier.
And the boundaries, I feel like that's a topic, and you have mentioned this to me before, that men sometimes even feel like they don't deserve their boundaries.
Yeah, or yeah, go ahead.
Can you first explain what are boundaries, what they look like, in case if somebody listening might have heard the word, but they might not know what is it that we're meaning when we're talking about this, and what's the importance of having them and communicating them?
So boundaries are very tied in with safety, which is one of the most important aspects of a human experience. Some people might call this, in metaphysical circles, your root chakra, your safety. And safety itself, or boundaries, can mean different things to different people. For instance, for some men, having a certain amount of money in savings so that they know whatever happens, they could live 1, 2, 3, 5 years and pay for everything, that could create a sense of safety. So that could be a personal boundary for them. For some women, having, or some men, or some non-binary, or some whoever, anybody falls on the gender spectrum is valid. But again, this podcast is targeted to men, is they might have a totally different sense of safety. So for instance, I like to have a home that I really like. Now, I also have, that's like a want and a safety for me. I like to have a home with nature surrounded. Now, I've also evolved myself enough spiritually that I can be happy anywhere. I'm not in fear. I don't really have fears of anything. For me, it's more of an aligned preference. So again, I'm in authentic alignment. So I know that I'm going to be safe anywhere I go. I know that I'm going to be happy anywhere I go. But I also acknowledge that I love having a really solid place to call home, a good foundation. I like to have nature around me because I know I need nature. If I don't get enough nature, I get out of balance. I get a little dopamine addicted, and I come out of authentic alignment. So that could be partially a safety thing. I also used to experience a lot of home insecurity, renting homes when I had a few dogs. And then somebody would put a house up for sale, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, now I have to move these other beings around, and I have to make sure that their needs are met. So it's just sort of looking at, again, whatever your boundaries are. And your boundaries can be mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, sexual. And a lot of men are not taught that they can have boundaries. And I'll speak for myself. I'm not speaking with a measuring stick. I'm speaking with a mirror. I have definitely have looked at ways in my life that I've completely overlooked or not prioritized the needs and boundaries of men in my life. Now, would they have been skillful enough to communicate them to me? Probably not. But that doesn't mean that they were any less valid. So and this is something you and I have talked about, that there are things that we do to men that if men did that to women, we would flip out, and we do flip out. And I'm not saying that there's not things that are done to women that are suboptimal, or to anybody of anywhere. I acknowledge all of that. I'm simply saying that we can sometimes forget in society that men have emotional needs too, and men have boundaries, and men have needs, and we need to start having conversations in society about what the needs, wants, boundaries, and values are on both sides or all sides. But it's helpful to understand our own, again, so that we can communicate those to others, or that we can be accountable for them. Now, boundaries can be overwhelming for people to start, and boundaries are basically just what are or are not within your preferred wants, needs, and values of your parts, and what are not. So, and what might be a boundary to one person is not a boundary to another person. So it's never like, oh, that person violated my boundaries. How could they? It's more like, did I communicate my needs in a loving, safe, non-judgmental, non-blaming way so that we're not shaming other people? And am I equally being curious about their boundaries and their wants and their needs? And it's about constant communication, because boundaries can change over time, and boundaries can be different in different relationships. So I think it all comes down to a healthy amount of self-inquiry and self-reflection, and more than anything, curiosity. Just continuously being curious about yourself, continuously being curious about others.
Have you ever experienced it where I'm just like making a spot here, where some men might see setting boundaries in some ways as a sign of weakness, or
Oh, sure. Sure. Men are taught a lot of things are a sign of weakness, but I would first just invite them to ask themselves, is that true? And can we find a distinction between weakness and authenticity? So are you willing to sacrifice your actual wants, needs, boundaries, and values in order to protect a self-concept of I am not weak? That seems pretty weak to me. That doesn't seem like very evolved behavior. That doesn't seem to me, it seems very normal and very common, and probably how most people live. But if we're here to evolve out of the emotional dark ages, I think we just need to do better. So, and yeah, I think that a lot of men would benefit from just some of this curiosity of self. And the more aware we are of our wants, needs, boundaries, and values, again, it's not enough to only care about that. It's also to just be curious, not responsible for others, unless we're in a relationship where we're doing that exchange of like, hey, here's what my needs are. Hey, here's what your needs are. And not expecting the other person to be the same. But like we've talked about before in dating and relationship coaching, which is really one of my specialties, is it's not going to an accountant and being like, but will you just be will you be a salesperson for me because you love me? Or not caring what they are at all and putting them in an HR role. It's more about, hey, I've got this, and this to offer. Here's the things I love, and seeing if those are compatible with what the other person loves. Not, are you willing? You know, a lot of men tell me, like, I told my partner I didn't really want to have kids, or I wasn't really, I was really career focused. And then the women are like, but you'll change your mind. And some of them do end up being like, yeah, actually, I really love being dad. But some of them are like, I don't love this job. So it's assessing, it's that mutual responsibility of assessing, especially in the emotional dark ages, because a lot of us aren't as aware of and skillfully communicating these, but being curious about others, so that we are starting to think more like a collective species as we evolve, and starting to care about the wants, needs, boundaries, and values of everybody, and find those win-wins instead of compromising. I don't get what I want, you don't get what you want, but finding healthy win-wins with compatible people. It doesn't mean you'll never have to do anything you don't want to do. It doesn't mean that you can only indulge yourself. But there's a healthy amount of indulging ourselves. There's a healthy pound, because people who are authentically aligned and in their magnetic masculinity are just happy people, and happy people don't hurt people. Happy people don't have to battle as many addictions. Happy people have more energy. Happy people spread more happiness where they go, and they project that inner state onto others. So it's just helpful not only for themselves, but helpful to sort of spread a bit of that love and connection and humanity. And I would definitely think there's nothing weak about that at all.
And are there any like common struggles that you would see men experience when it comes to either knowing or communicating their boundaries, or just expressing them, or knowing? Like, are there any struggles?
For some men, it's going to be really hard because it's going to be unfamiliar. And what is unfamiliar to us, the brain, again, to grossly oversimplify neuroscience, the brain likes to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and run repetitive patterns. Also, because men haven't been taught to feel uncomfortable. Again, if we refer back to my bicep metaphor from previous episodes, mental, spiritual, and emotional growth is not dissimilar to growing a bicep muscle. So if I want to grow that muscle, it's going to get really uncomfortable, borderline painful, but I'm not going to go, oh, it's uncomfortable, I'm out, like men do emotionally, which is actually not super strong behavior. It's more like, oof. Well, and learning to discern, is this discomfort a KPI of a boundary, or is this the discomfort of growth? And the only way we're going to cultivate that clarity is through some failures, through some curiosity, and at least being able to ask ourselves those questions. But again, it's going to get a little bit uncomfortable when you learn to express or communicate these things to somebody else. But if you want to be happy, and you want to be fulfilled, and you want to be healthy, and you want to be connected to yourself and others, then I think it's worth going through that temporary discomfort.
And going to the last one, once. Can you talk on those a bit?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different schools of thought that lend to this societal desire. Well, let's first look at everything can be in what we might call shadow or light, or anything can be in a pendulum swing of helpful and unhelpful. Let's cause it, not make it so dualistic. Helpful and unhelpful. So pride can be helpful and healthy, or unhelpful and unhealthy. Not that we're judging that, right? It's all just information. So we want to be able to look and assess. So pride can be helpful and unhelpful. Humility can be helpful and unhelpful. Anything of those can be a coping mechanism, or really authentic and healthy and aligned. And again, if we're not meeting that need directly, it'll probably be in the unhelpful, because we'll be manipulating to get some of those needs met. But looking at whether they're helpful or unhelpful requires us challenging some social norms. So for instance, if we have been taught that you should never be selfish and that you should only be of service to others, you might not think you deserve to get your needs met. Well, I do think that it's wonderful to be helpful to others, and I do think it's wonderful to be of service to others, but you can't pour from an empty bucket. So if you're not filling your own bucket, and you're depriving yourself, there's nothing enlightened, abundant about lack and fear. So this is a universe of abundance. So if I want sex, I want money, I want, we're often too ashamed to say what we truly want. So then we get resentful or manipulative or cranky or bitchy or frustrated or whatever. Again, drink too much, whatever, develop pornography addictions, dopamine addictions, whatever it is, because we're too conditioned not to be allowed to have our wants. And we can want And there's nothing wrong with being a little bit selfish. Because again, if you're filling your own bucket, you're filling your own needs, you're going to be less likely to need as much external validation. We still do need some external feedback because we are an interdependent species. And meeting ourselves where we're at is important. And we're not all in a state of perpetual enlightenment or samadhi bliss states where we don't need anything. But we are here to interact with each other in this human experience on this planet. We are here to grow and evolve the quality of our consciousness, and that does involve interacting with others. So yes, others, and yes, self. And again, if you're meeting your needs in a healthy way and you're self-aware of your wants, you're going to be capable of meeting those needs in a healthy way and not feeling frustrated, unfulfilled, and drained. But if you're like, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this, whoo! Again, not if you have a family and you have other responsibilities, you need to balance their wants, needs, boundaries, and values. If you only want to think about yourself, that's absolutely fine. But then don't be married and have children. So once we're in an interdependent relationship of any sort, it's helpful to think of the wants, needs, boundaries, and values of the other, or find a way to have, I don't love compromise, find a win-win where you can get that need met and the other need, or sometimes get this need met and sometimes get that need met, or sometimes get this want. I don't believe that wanting things should be completely getting the things we want should be the source of our happiness. I think we should get what we want from a state of happiness. So I'm in a state of like, I love myself and I love my life. What else can I experience? This will be fun. I can have this. Ooh, I want that. Ooh, I want to drive an expensive sports car, not because I feel like I'm not good enough if I don't have one, because why not? I really think it's fun. But if I was like, oh no, you must be humble. So I don't need that to be happy, because I am happy. My internal state is happy because I'm in authentic alignment and I skillfully pilot my vehicle of consciousness. But then why not pilot it wherever I want to go and enjoy the buffet of experiences of the planet? And we're often taught to be ashamed of our wants, but that, again, shame-based behavior and fear-based behavior do not typically lead to the most optimal outcomes. So I think it's healthier to look at those things with non-judgment, look at them with information, look at them as information, because then we're less likely to act out of hostile parts takeovers.
So with all of these, because these are like a lot of things even to look at, not even talking about navigating them, what are like, well, this might be not the right question, but which one of them is the most important one to look at or to start looking at? Pretty much like, where do you start?
Curiosity and patience. You don't have to figure it out. This is a lifelong process. And you're going to continuously cultivate more and more clarity. So don't look at yourself as behind. Look at yourself as, oh, I now know what I didn't know. I'm already a step closer. That helps me get out of this sort of frantic state I used to sometimes get in, where I was like, I need to know, I need to know, I need to know. And again, that action I was taking was from an energy of fear, not an energy of curiosity. So it's looking at, hey, this might be overwhelming to start, but I mean, you can start with, I usually have people start with, I have 3 or 4 personality questionnaires. And then we look at, do you agree with this? And we start being curious. I have workbooks, like, or if some people like to do it in workbooks and some people like to do it verbally with me. Some people like me to give them the workbook and they work it on their own. And it's just sort of certain Socratic questioning and certain tools or certain actions that you can take that help you cultivate this clarity. And in a way that allows our logical brain to feel safe to explore some of these deeper needs. And it can be really hard to question and challenge and want and desire things. Like, if you don't pinpoint your most selfish needs, you're either going to get that need unmet or you're going to become manipulative and find ways to meet it. So you might as well bring it to the table and at least give it a chance to hold the talking stick, so that you as the CEO can make a decision rather than a hostile takeover or just a continuous perpetual feeling of unfulfillment. You know?
I have a question in case if there's anybody listening who might be like, I'm not really interested in getting to know myself and doing all that. I just want to get results. Like, that's all I want to do. Why should I do all this like digging?
Well, how can you possibly expect yourself to be able to get results if you don't have clarity on your wants, needs, boundaries, and values? Or at least not total clarity, but if you don't know what lights you up, if you don't know what you want, if you don't know what you desire from a healthy, authentically aligned place, then you're not going to have a very fulfilling life, which is a valid option.
Yeah.
So I think the results, again, there's almost nothing that doesn't require a little bit of effort or a little bit of discomfort in order to grow.
Yeah. And as we close off, is there anything else you want to add, or maybe even like to put it all together? You could talk about what's the importance of having our actions in alignment with authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values.
Yeah, again, it's going to, I think we have some social accountability that we will be less manipulative, less, and again, I don't judge any of those things. It's okay if you have those things right now. It's fine. I've done all of them, I'm sure. So it's more about the bravery and the evolutionary mastery of being willing to look at, in what ways am I not showing up in my authentic alignment, and just cultivating that clarity on what do I really want. And at the end of the day, this is something I'm going to close with. If you are somebody who's afraid to be selfish, or now again, selfishness can again be in a helpful or an unhelpful way. You know, if somebody's like, if I'm not feeling well and I really want to spend the day reading, and I've been asked to go do something for somebody else, and I don't respect my own boundary and I self-sacrifice for them, and I say, oh no, I shouldn't be selfish, I'll go do that. Is that really helpful? No. And do you really want other people self-sacrificing to meet your needs? Maybe yes, but if the answer is yes, then that's a very good, clear condition. That's a very clear sign that you have some work to do there, and there's no problem with that, no shame, but do it, do better. But I think looking at the end of the day, everything is a selfish act. We're either doing it with awareness or we're subconsciously manipulating. Because even being of charity service, why are you doing that? To help them. And why do you want to help them? Because they need it. Great. And why else? Because it makes you feel good. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We should be of service to others. That's why I'm doing this podcast, is so that's one of the reasons. And the other selfish reason is that I hope it helps me find some really aligned clients to work with. And another reason is that it fills my need for social service, but it also meets my need to enjoy working with really soul aligned clients and getting them over that, getting them through that process quickly and efficiently, which is good for my business. And yeah, so I think at the end of the day, if we're going to be really accountable and really look at ourselves, everything is a selfish act. We're either doing it from a place of awareness and the ability to question, is this in my highest good, their highest good, and the highest good of the system or source or God or whichever metaphor you prefer? Or am I just unconsciously manipulating all the time to meet needs that I'm not brave enough to admit that I have, or that I'm just completely blind to? So I'm letting all my inner parts that developed when I was 5 or 6 or 9 or 12 pilot my vehicle of consciousness for me. Totally normal. That's the common state of humanity. But I would propose that it's that it's suboptimal, and that it's going to take evolutionary leaders to start looking at different models and starting to, that's why I like to break things down into simple models, and so that we can get our logic on board in order to navigate the emotional and the spiritual and the other dimensions of our human self, the multidimensionality of the human species, that we just need to look at if we want to evolve out of the emotional dark ages and all have a lot more fun.
Yeah.
While being socially responsible and accountable for others as well. But again, the more full our bucket is, the more we have to flow out everywhere else too.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's wants, needs, boundaries, and values. If you have any questions, you can either comment on YouTube, or there'll be a link where you can submit them. And I feel like here it would be helpful to mention also that if you want to get more clarity with this, you can always book a call with Sandy. Sandy's genius at this, so you might as well use this opportunity. And for the next week, we will be talking. So we're now done with authentic alignment. And next week, we'll be talking about vehicle of consciousness.
So the vehicle of consciousness. So just to refresh everyone's memory, the magnetic masculinity blueprint is basically authentic alignment plus piloting your vehicle of consciousness, which are just two metaphors I've created to very much simplify and give a practical, experiential roadmap to help you create your most fulfilling magnetic masculinity. And breaking these down into these metaphors and going through these podcasts a couple of times can save you decades or maybe lifetimes of seeking, searching, achieving, accomplishing, and still feeling stuck, frustrated, lonely, misunderstood, and missing out on your best, most fulfilling life and most delicious, enjoyable relationships.
Yeah. So we will see you next week.
I look forward to it. Thanks so much.